Well, welcome to another episode of Cage Free Theology. I'm Clint Archer.
And I'm Will Brannon.
What's our question today, Will?
Our question for the day is, just how human was Jesus?
Let's get fully into it.
So we're coming up to Christmas. Christmas is all about the birth of Jesus, what we would call the incarnation. And I want to start with a question that I'm betting you've never been asked before. Are you ready? So this is a question for you and those listening. You can think, how would you answer this?
Sure.
If Jesus played Michael Jordan in a game of horse, who do you think would win?
Horse is where you each take a shot at the box.
Yeah, you take a shot. If you make it, somebody else has to take it. So it's about who gets the most shots and who gets knocked out by getting all the letters first.
Okay, there's the answer that I want to give, but and then there's the answer I think would be more theologically accurate. Maybe we'll answer it at the end.
Okay, yeah, so we can come back to that at the end. We'll come back to Jesus and Michael Jordan. But let's start here, just big picture. Why is it so important that Jesus was truly human? Why does that matter for our salvation even?
I mean, I think it has to do with the fact that Jesus died on our behalf. So how would he be able to do that if he were not a human? I remember when I was doing research for my dissertation on animals, I was reading articles by people saying, well, Jesus just needed to incarnate as one of the creatures. Like he could have come as a dolphin and died on behalf of his creatures, which is... I mean, it's absurd for a number of reasons, but these were serious suggestions. It's like, no, Jesus had to come as a human being because he was dying for human beings who had sinned against God. So he has to be fully human and know our weaknesses. And Hebrews tells us that he's a high priest who sympathizes with our weakness. Why? Mm-hmm. Because he had those weaknesses.
So my experience, and you can tell me if this is yours as well, is if you ask any believer, was Jesus truly God and truly man, or fully God and fully man, they will say without hesitation, yes.
Yeah, you have to be a Christian.
But then when you actually get into the details of just how human was he, what was his life like as a human being? I think some people are kind of caught off guard to how human he was, how the Bible describes his human experience. Right. So we'll get into specific examples in a moment, but let's start with the major passage that describes the incarnation and what Jesus did, how he humbled himself in becoming a man, is primarily Philippians chapter 2.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you about that passage first. So Philippians 2, starting in verse 6, says that he existed in the form of God and did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a slave, by being born in the likeness of man. So when people read that passage, it starts by saying in verse 6 that he existed in the form of God. So what does that mean? That he's in the form of God in eternity past?
Yeah, though he was in the form of God, he didn't count equality with God a thing to be grasped. So being in the form of God means being equal with God. So we say, in the Nicene Creed, he is of one being with the Father, God of God, light of light, true God of true God, begotten, not made. That concept of the same substance as the Father. That was something that they really, remember we spoke about that in our Nicaea episode, the homoousios, that he's the same substance of God. That's what that's talking about.
So would it be fair to say that phrase, clearly, when we think about truly God, truly man, that emphasizes the truly God part, that He is in the form of God, meaning there's no distinction in terms of substance or nature. He is God.
He's fully God. He's the same substance as the Father.
And then some people are thrown off by the next phrase. So if he is God, did not regard equality, this is the end of verse 6, with God a thing to be grasped. So does that mean that he ceased to be God when he became a man? What is going on there, that he did not regard equality with God something to be grasped?
Yeah, it certainly does not mean that he ceased to be God. The equality of the role of being God, the preeminence of being God, and that was not something, even though he was entitled to it as being, a member of the Trinity himself, being God himself, he didn't consider that something that he needed to clutch and cling to and, defend and hold on to, because he was willing to empty himself of that, the privilege of that for the time that he was in his incarnation. That's why this passage, sometimes theologians will call this the kenosis, from the Greek word ken, talking about empty, and so he somehow emptied himself. I mean, that's what the word literally means, of the, we like to say, the independent use of all of his divine attributes.
So would it be fair to say, I've heard people explain this as when it says he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, we can think of it as subtraction by addition, meaning he is God. He didn't subtract his deity from himself. What he did is he added humanity to himself.
That's what verse 8 is talking about when it says, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient. So at first he was only in the form of God. And then he took on that, he has a divine nature. He had only a divine nature in eternity past. And then at the time of the incarnation, he took on a second nature, a human nature, which he added to it. So he didn't exchange one for the other. He didn't, divide one in half and add. He just added a second nature, which is a very difficult thing for us to get our minds around. Like, if our listeners are saying like, what? Then join the club. I can't think of any other example in nature or history or biology or science where something takes on a second nature.
Right.
I mean, I guess, sometimes when I preach on John 1, and he was the light of the world, I kind of get into the fact that light is one of the probably the strangest substance that we've ever studied as humans, because it fully has a wave nature, and at the same time it fully has a particle nature. White light does, and that's very mystifying to physicists and quantum mechanics of how that works. But here you have something that acts like a wave and it acts like a particle at the same time. And so maybe that's an analogy for us to think of. It has both natures, not half. And so when we say, I sometimes use the example of my kids being dual citizens. They were born in South Africa, so they're fully South African. They could run for office there. They can vote there. They're 100% South African. But they had an American mom, and our American citizens have American passports, can run for office here, can vote here in the States.
And now an American dad.
And now they have an American dad too. So they're still African Americans technically. But anyway, but they're 100% of both. It's not like you can only vote in one of those elections. No, you could vote in both. And in the same way, Jesus is fully God and functions as God fully, but he's also human and functions as a human fully. And then we always have to just add, to be clear, yet without sin.
Right.
Because sin is not part of being human.
Sure.
It's part of being a fallen human.
Right. So would it be fair to say then, if we think of eternity past, from eternity past, he is the Son, but he is not from eternity past a human being. He becomes a human being in time.
Right. And that's sometimes a weird thing for people to, if they hear that for the first time, they're like, what do you mean Jesus wasn't a human always? No, he took on a second nature, this incarnation, and he will always have that nature. And I think that that's something that's worthy of our worship and contemplation, is to think that in order to save us, he had to add this nature, not just for the time. I mean, it's kind of like, well, yeah, he lived this life of humiliation, but really it was only for 33 years. Yes, that's true, but he permanently took on the second nature. He will be a human being forever.
Mm-hmm. My kids ask about this all the time.
Really?
Like, trying to understand, okay,
How old are they?
So I have a daughter who is 7 and then a son who is about to turn 5.
I mean, I know that. I was just asking
you're one of my elders. You know how old my kids are. But they ask questions all the time about, okay, so is Jesus with us like now? Right. But Jesus is a person in heaven, but like there's not a person here with us. And it's that tension of, yes, he's truly God. He's the Son of God. So in that sense, he is omnipresent. Yeah. But Jesus, as a human being, his body has a location. He is seated at the right hand of God. He is in heaven.
Yes,
and that blows my children's mind and mine as well.
Yeah,
for that record.
And
what an astounding
mystery. Comes back to earth, he comes back bodily. It'll be a bodily return. His location will change. But at the same time, we talk about, inviting Jesus into your heart. And I kind of cringe a little at that. It's like, what's down from heaven?
Yeah.
But I know what people mean.
Sure.
It's in the sense of his omnipresence.
So let's get into what it means that he was truly human on earth. So again, in verse 6 says that he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped or a thing to be held onto. So there are ways in which, as a human being, he doesn't cease to be God, but he does choose not to use his full range of divine attributes to his own advantage or outside of his Father's will. So how does that help us think through verses like Matthew 24:36 throw people off when Jesus says, speaking of his second coming, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. So how does the humanity of Jesus help us understand how he is truly God, but there are moments in his life where he clearly says, I don't know this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the concept of him giving up the independent use of his divine attributes, that phrase is always helpful to me because he is able to, you could say, tap into his divine attributes at any point because he's fully God. So if he wants to know something supernaturally, he can do that. And we see him reading the minds
at times
of people. It says that he knew their hearts, he knew what they were thinking, that kind of thing. And also he tells Peter, for example, oh, you think you're not going to deny me? You're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows tomorrow, So he can do that, but it's not as if from the moment he was born till the moment he died and went to heaven, constantly he was knowing everything all the time, the way we think of God the Father, doing all the time, because that's what he didn't grasp. He had the right to do that, but he gave that up in order to be like us.
Right.
And so that's what that means, that even while he was here on earth, he didn't know the divine timetable of when he would return again, apparently, according to that verse.
Yeah, and I think this is so important because when sometimes we say truly God, truly man, but then we kind of let the truly God part absorb the truly man part. And people think of Jesus' life on earth as, yeah, he did it. He was human, but not really. Like he kind of, it wasn't like the full range of human experience. And this is showing like, no, it really was.
Yeah. What that looks like is I once got into a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about somebody who was ministering to prostitutes. He and his wife and another couple would go down to this area in South Africa where they were prostitutes, and they would meet these women and they would share the gospel with them together. Everything was very above board. It was, of course, perfectly legal and that, and they've got their wives with them. And this person was saying to me that I just don't think that's right. I just don't think that a pastor should ever be seen with a prostitute, unless, she shows up at church or something like that. And my response was, well, Jesus did. I mean, that Jesus ministered to immoral women. And he said, yeah, but that was Jesus. So that's different. Because he was Jesus, there's like, what, no temptation, there's no... and I was like, no, the whole point of Jesus coming and being a human is to show us this is how you do it right.
Right.
It can be done. He was tempted in every way that we're tempted, and yet without sin. So that's kind of what it looks like, I think, when people focus on the deity of Christ instead of humanity.
Yeah, I always, when I teach this, especially to students, I use the example of there was a video game I played a lot when I was a kid, and you could go to the main menu and type in this code on the keyboard. And if you typed in the code, it gave your character in the game like unlimited everything, and like you couldn't get hurt in the game.
God mode, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's the cheat code was called God mode, and it was IDDQD for nerds that are listening if they know what game it was. But you IDDQD, and then there was another code that was IDKFA. I'm letting my nerd out now, but
this is nerdy.
Yeah. Anyways, so but I use the illustration. Jesus did not God mode his way through life. He is truly God, but it's not like anytime he faces a challenge, he just snaps his fingers and I just make that problem go away, or I feel physically tired. Like now I'm not tired anymore. Right. No, he lived as a human being. So let's talk about specific examples of that. What are some passages that come to your mind that emphasize the human experience of Jesus throughout his life?
Well, one is when he's in the temple as a boy, as a 12-year-old boy in Luke chapter 2, and he's asking questions and answering, and he's astounding people by how wise he is. But this is when his parents have kind of lost him, and they finally find him. And at the end of that account, this is in Luke 2:52. It says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." So here he's growing not only in societal, growing socially, favor with man. He's growing in stature. He's obviously getting bigger and stronger as he grows up. But it says he increased in wisdom. And even this, he increased in favor with God and man. Like there was a growth in his spirituality as he grew in his relationship with the Father the same way we do. And this increasing in wisdom, sometimes I remind people, Jesus didn't come out of the womb speaking Hebrew fluently.
Right.
As a 1-day-old, it's not like he was a polyglot, could speak any language.
Yeah, he had to learn language.
He would have to learn it. He would have to learn to speak. He'd have to learn to walk. Why? Because that's human. That's part of a human weakness and limitation that he took on.
Right. And if we don't keep in mind that he had a human nature, that becomes very confusing because God is not learning.
Right.
But as a human being, he's learning. So that, and I find this incredibly encouraging because Jesus throughout his ministry, he's quoting the Torah, the law, left, right, and center.
Yeah.
And it's not as if this is all just omnisciently, he just knows it. He studied the word. He was a student of the word. He learned it. So I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but this is hypothetical, but I'm curious what you think of this question. So Jesus is growing in wisdom and stature. He's studying the law. He's learning. Do you think Jesus at some point in his past was reading the Old Testament scriptures and came to see, I am the Messiah?
Dude.
Have you ever thought of that before?
I haven't actually thought of that before. I mean, I guess I thought of as he was learning the Old Testament, I would assume that he has the full wisdom. As he's learning things, as he's seeing it and learning it, he's understanding it like no one's understood it before. I mean, not only do I assume he just had a great IQ, but because he's not tainted with sin and because he has wisdom, the type of wisdom we would have if we were sinless and immersed in scripture, I think, maybe he gets to Isaiah 53 and he's like, oh, wow, the servant's going to suffer. This is my destiny.
Yeah, and what you said is directly out of the idea that he's full of wisdom and that the Spirit of the Lord rests upon him. That's Isaiah 11. That's part of who the Messiah is, that as a human being, he has this incredible fear of the Lord, wisdom, and as he's guided by the Holy Spirit, as he studies and learns.
Yeah, we also have that passage in Hebrews that talks about how he learned obedience through suffering as well.
It's Hebrews 5.
Yeah, I don't think what that means is he was disobedient and got better at obeying, obviously, because disobedience would be sin. But just that he, again, grew into the maturity of understanding what obedience looks like and the level to which he would be obedient.
So that's examples of him growing in wisdom or knowledge. What about other examples of his humanity? For example, like human exhaustion or weakness.
Yeah, he's asleep on the boat, is the big one. And
I love that picture.
I know.
That Jesus is so exhausted from doing ministry. He's just conked out in the boat through the storm.
Sleeping through the storm. Yeah. I mean, he would get physically drained. And like you say, he didn't just, recharge. There's that scene in The Matrix where, the character Neo gets this download and he looks up and he says, I know Kung Fu. It's like he didn't have to study it. He didn't have to learn it. He just now knows it because he got this download. And I would be like, man, that would be so great. Imagine you're going to France, you just download French and now you know it. But Jesus never did that.
Right.
And again, let's keep reminding ourselves, he could have.
Right.
And chose not to. And that was the constant, he didn't grasp and clutch and cling to this idea that, well, I'm equal with God, I deserve better. He emptied himself of that. He gave that up for us so that he would suffer the way we did. And then when you see him using it, like walking on water to catch up to the boat or calming the storm or feeding the 5,000 when they were hungry, those types of things, those miracles are never done out of convenience. Sometimes it might look that way, but they're done in order to make a point.
Sure.
And he only did those miracles in order to make those points. He never did it selfishly or for himself. Now, if I had any kind of superpower, I'm sure I would use it all the time for just convenience.
Sure. So that's you gave the example of him being tired, being in the boat. We also have the example of he fasts at the start of his ministry, and we can imagine after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, how hungry would you be? Like, what would your physical state be in? And when we read that, we can easily think like, well, it's Jesus. Like, he probably wasn't that hungry. Like, no, he was as hungry as you would be.
And the scriptures
going 40
say
days.
He became hungry. And that's why when Satan says to him, like, well, if you're the Son of God, just command this stone to turn into bread. And the irony of all of that is he could absolutely have done that, but that was not God's will. He only used his miraculous powers for God's will.
So growth, human exhaustion. What about human emotions, the full range of human emotions?
I mean, the anger of of the Lord coming into the temple and seeing these poor people being abused by the religious system, and he makes a whip and chases out the animals and turns over the tables, and burning with this indignation, righteous indignation for the glory of God. He wasn't taking it as a personal offense. And the way I like to think of that, to remind myself how rare it is to be able to do that, is my anger. I think most of our anger is usually focused on the idea that somebody did something to me and I'm angry about it, or I wanted something and didn't get it, I'm angry about it. But with true righteous indignation is when you take yourself out of the equation and it's all about God's glory.
Yeah.
So, like, if I see there were these people would put posters up on our church in South Africa, on our church sign, advertising abortions, cheap abortion clinics, and the anger in me wasn't, no one's trying to abort me, or my loved ones, but I was angry that there was this evil out there that wants to kill children, that they would use a church facility to advertise that. I think that's an example of righteous indignation. Right. It's a human thing, and Jesus had that. He was also a man acquainted with sorrows, acquainted with grief, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Isaiah 53 tells us he was sad. He was sad over Jerusalem. He wept when Lazarus died. And to me, that's a very poignant moment, because he knows he's going to raise Lazarus.
Right.
Like, he waited for Lazarus to die so that he could raise him from the dead. He's about to raise him from the dead. And yet when he sees all the people mourning and his friend is dead, and he cries. Well, yeah, that's human. Just like if a loved one dies and I know I'm going to be reunited with them one day in heaven, that doesn't help a lot. I mean, it helps some, but in the moment, you're still grieving, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah. It is amazing when you put it all together, because if you read these just here and there when you're reading through the Gospels, it's one thing. But when you really think about the full picture of it, that he weeps. He's betrayed by friends. Luke 22, when he's in the garden, he is under immense stress that we can't even imagine because of the cup of God's wrath that's going to be poured out upon him. I also love this scene in Matthew 8 where the centurion has faith. And it doesn't say that Jesus says, yeah, big deal, I knew. It says that he marveled, that he had this sense of amazement, like he's experiencing all of these things as he goes through life, limitation and weakness.
Yeah, so I preached a sermon on that once, and I titled it the guy who gobsmacked God. Gobsmacked is an old Scottish word just meaning when you're gobsmacked, you're just like, you're marveling. And a gentleman approached me after the sermon saying, I really don't think that you should say that, because God could never be gobsmacked because he knows everything. And I mean, I was just trying to be clever, probably too clever for my own good there with a title or whatever, just trying to be funny. But really that is, well, no, Jesus, he could be surprised because of his humanity.
And he was.
And he was.
Yeah. So, and that leads to another question, actually, because when we think about what Jesus is experiencing, everything we're talking about here are his experiences as truly man. So when Jesus dies on the cross, sometimes people say God died.
Right.
What is that a way that we should talk because he was a human being, or is that not a precise way to speak about Jesus dying on the cross? Would you say God died on the cross?
I mean, there's always good, better, best ways of articulating something. And so I always try to use the most clear language I can. And when somebody uses different language, I try to be gracious and not be a grammar Nazi, assuming that they mean what they should mean. But obviously God can't die. God is immortal. But part of being human is being mortal, and Jesus died, and Jesus is God. So if that's what you mean, then yes, okay, God died. It's kind of like when people say, Mary, the mother of God. Well, when they first came up with that phrase, theologians were trying to emphasize the deity of Christ. That a person who gave birth to him was giving birth to God. Well, sure, but over time that became a over honoring of Mary, that she's, God's mother is this, my mom is my superior, therefore God's mother is up there with God, kind of thing. So I just like to use the clearest terminology I can when I talk about theology.
Right.
So I would probably not use the phrase God died on the cross.
Yeah, the Son as the Son. It's not like God ceased to be. God did not die.
Right.
He's eternal. The human nature of Jesus, or of the Son, Jesus, he died.
Yes.
Right. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Today you will be with me in paradise. Why? Because I'll be there.
One other thing that when I'm teaching on the incarnation, the humanity of Christ, I bring up, and almost every time I teach this, I get some sort of pushback. So I'm curious how you would answer this question. Do you think Jesus ever laughed?
I mean, I really do.
I do as well.
I do. I don't think that you can make a clear case of it from the Gospels recording that. Although when you look at how Jesus responded in certain times, you can tell there's a dry sense of humor there. Mm-hmm. There's a penchant for the absurd and comical
sarcasm, even.
And there's, take the log out of your own eye, buddy. A camel going through the eye of a needle. These things are, I especially love when he says, "You go tell that fox Herod." No. Even better when John the Baptist. Who did he come out to see? A reed shaking in the wind. And he says, "You came to see someone with fine clothing." Oh no, people with soft clothing, they live in the palaces, like with gay Herod over there kind of thing. He's being funny. Yeah. So I think that he was a man who would have used humor to the glory of God. I don't think he would have been flippant. But laughing is not sinful.
Yeah.
It's human. In fact, I mean, I guess the question would be, have you ever met a human being who never laughed at anything?
Yeah.
And if you have, I would say that they're not the ideal model of what a human being should be.
Yeah. I would, of course, say that there's no verse I'm aware of that says Jesus laughed.
Right.
But Jesus is a human being. I'm assuming that if he got sick, he would blow his nose. As a baby, he cried. He had the full range of emotions. So I always think, what would a human being be like who never laughed? I mean, Ecclesiastes 3 says there's a time to mourn and a time to laugh. It's part of the human experience. Right. Children loved being around Jesus. I'm trying to imagine somebody that is a stoic automaton all the time that kids are drawn to. It's just, so I will grant there's no verse, but it seems bizarre to me to say, no, Jesus was a man of sorrows. He never would have laughed. No, this is part of the human experience, even according to Ecclesiastes 3.
Right.
So let's come back to the initial question. If Jesus played Michael Jordan in a game of horse, who do you think would win?
I think Michael Jordan would win.
And explain why, so that we're not accused of heresy.
Okay, because Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. At basketball, and Jesus would have to have learned the skills, the physical skills. I think Jesus would be really good at anything he tried to do.
Sure.
But he wouldn't have been as tall as Michael Jordan. He wouldn't have had the hours of practice. And so if you just put Jesus while he was here on earth against Michael Jordan, because it's not a sin issue at this point. It's a physical skill. Skills need to be learned. They need to be acquired. They need to be practiced. And so I think he would have been a better carpenter than Michael Jordan was a carpenter. Why? Because he had more practice.
Yeah. Good answer. All right. Anything else on the incarnation or the humanity of Christ?
No, that's it.
All right. That does it for this episode of Cage Free Theology.